We also spent some time looking at more localized impacts of invasive plants and found a couple of examples to help ground the costs associated with invasive plant removal and control here in the Fayetteville area. Recent Lespedeza removal out at the Westside Wastewater Treatment Plant that cost a little over $1,300 to complete. You all are, I'm sure, familiar with and been following Greedy Goats and their work in a couple of our parks. They've also been active on several parcels of private property around Fayetteville. Cost to hire Greedy Goats to come out and munch on invasive plants is $3,000 an acre per treatment. And then in 2014, our Parks and Recreation Department managed $31,000 worth of volunteer labor to do invasive plant removal on parks within the city of Fayetteville. So certainly there is an economic impact here in Fayetteville. Yeah, question?
I was going to ask just real quick, on the Lespedeza, like, is that a real specific species? Because there's a bunch of different kinds, aren't there?
There are two that have been identified by our stakeholder group as being invasive to our area and
Okay.
particularly harmful to our area.
I was just curious because I was thinking that might be kind of a broad.
Yeah, and I don't recall.
It got species specific.
Yeah, I don't recall which Lespedeza species it was that they had at the wastewater plant. So I
Should
can't-
have Jennifer show up. She'd
Ceresia,
rattle those off.
is it Lespedeza?
No, that's all right. I wouldn't know, but I just was
It's-
curious because I.
But one of the things that's important is to actually give a complete specification of the names, because as in honeysuckle, when you say honeysuckle, we're getting rid of honeysuckle. Okay, there's bush honeysuckle that's non-native, that John's got it, and we've got it all over town. And we've got Japanese honeysuckle, which is a vine that just covers other plants and wraps around the stems of young trees and kills them eventually. But we've also got two species of wonderful native honeysuckle vines that, you know, they're just going to grow where you plant them or where they're growing in nature. I mean, I show you some places they grow wild, and I dread, you know, something's going to be built where a lot of native plants are all the time. But if people, okay, by example, when the goats were out there, the first night that it was on TV, and they showed Wilson Park and the goats eating. Well, guess what? This one goat, close up, he was eating a native honeysuckle vine.
He didn't know the difference, did he?
He did.
I bet it'll
There.
grow back.
I didn't
though.
train.
Oh, it'll come back with
Yeah.
roots. They're all coming back with
I think what Aubrey's getting at, and what I was kind of thinking is, and maybe the policy is more specific and all that. You're probably getting to that, but yeah, it probably needs to be fairly specific because there's some Lespedezas out there that.
They're just
Maybe
beautiful.
And it
wildflowers.
was. Peter will get to that,
Yeah,
but I mean,
okay.
it's,
Okay.
this is to the city council,
Okay.
so it's more generalized to that
Okay.
group.
Yeah, when we get down to legislating, we're using the scientific
Okay.
names. Yeah, most definitely. So also, we found several examples of species that provide poor habitat for our native wildlife. They choke out plants, many that create dense monocultures, particularly in our understory layer. The bush honeysuckle and the privet are particularly notorious for doing that. A few that have been known to kill trees, some plants that are poisonous to wildlife and also toxic to humans. And so those are kind of all the impacts that were identified as being caused here locally by some of the identified invasive plants. So back to the definition, the stakeholders felt pretty strongly that yes, there are several invasive plants that are non-native to our ecosystem, and several of those plants are causing a problem here in Fayetteville. And so what we did is, and again, this has common names for more of a simplicity of showing the plant's sake. What we did is we asked our stakeholders, many of whom were, very are horticulturalists or are botanists or own nurseries, so they're very well versed in
There's a lot of PhDs and master's
Yeah,
degrees
yeah.
in fields in there.
knew these plants quite well. We gave them a list of 37, started with a list of 37 plants that had been identified as invasive either in Arkansas or Texas or Oklahoma or Chicago or somewhere with a similar environment to Fayetteville, similar climate to us, or a touch state. And we said rate all these plants in terms of the ones that are, you know, the most damaging to our environment here in Fayetteville. And so that is the number they gave those plants is plotted on this up and down y-axis. So 0 to 5, how invasive is the plant? 5 is the most invasive, 0 is the least invasive. And then what we did is we said, okay, you know, even if a plant is really, really invasive, if it's completely unavailable, you can't get it anywhere, well, maybe it's not really being introduced all that much anymore. And so perhaps if it's not accessible, then it's really not worth creating a rule on that particular plant. So what we also did is we plotted the availability of each of these plants, and that's our x-axis. So is it available in a store or online? Is it just available in a store? Is it just available online? And what we found is, what we felt like, with the help of the stakeholders, is that the plants clustered to the top right of being plotted on this graph were the ones that were most in need of some sort of regulation addressing their continued introduction and already establishment here in Fayetteville. And so everything above and to the right of the pinkish white area, pinkish red area, excuse me, there's 18 plants there. Those are the ones that we put on the official Fayetteville invasive species list. And I can read those off for folks if they can't, if anybody can't read those.
It's hard to see that one way up in the corner.
Top right is Chinese privet, and next
Oh,
underneath it is Bradford pear,
Yeah, I got that.
and then English ivy's below that.
Okay.
So there's 18 plants on that list, and those 18 are the ones that the stakeholders again felt like were the most damaging to the environment, but also had some degree of availability, with the exception of the multiflora rose, kudzu, and the Cerveza lespedeza. But still, they felt like those were well established enough that they were worth legislating on and educating on as well.
Peter, is there any concern that addressing the biggest offenders like that will elevate the others over time? Whether they'll be maybe unavailable now, but will demand increase or anything like that?
That's a good point.
I mean, not that somebody's out creating a market just for evil
Yeah.
invasive plants, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's always, it's difficult to predict what can happen. But in some cases, you know, some of the state laws on plants that have been passed have been an attempt at getting ahead of certain plants before they've become problems. But for the most part, these were ones that either had some degree of establishment or were prevalent enough that they felt like they need to be educated on and need to be limited in terms of access to the plants.
It
making
was
sure there's-
interesting. I was at one of the big box stores this weekend, and Burning Bush was something that they had.
Yeah.
And it was on sale, and they were trying to they sell more of it. It was actually on sale, not just for sale. And I told the plant person in that area that it was on the invasive species list, and they had no idea, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the one person we really couldn't find for the group was someone from Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, you name it, the big box stores, a buyer, a representative buyer for that,
Right.
you know, to actually give us insight into, because their seasonal purchasing is a lot different than someone, say, from Westwood.
Sure.
And obviously, it's a lot harder to get in touch with those people, so it's hard to find those.
We had representation from Westwood Nursery and White River Nursery, but we were unable to get
Oh.
a big box retailer
'Cause
representative.
that was one of my questions at city council, but I thought we had reached out to them.
We
said they
had,
didn't
we did reach
respond.
out, but
Okay,
we were
they didn't
unsuccessful in
respond.
landing
Yeah.
anyone.
Okay.
And you can't just go into the Lowe's, I mean, those people don't know what's
Yeah.
coming up,
In fact, we
you
had
know,
we had
season
a
to season.
person identified from Walmart, and
Yeah.
for whatever reason, that individual was advised not to participate.
I wonder why that was.
Imagine that.
Can't
No.
say
So
why.
Peter, could you tell me the 4 banned plants in Arkansas?
Oh, I can try. Purple loosestrife. None of them are these because they're
Oh.
already banned statewide. Purple loosestrife. You know the other 3, Aubrey?
Well, the bull thistle listed over here, and the, what's the other, nodding thistle that
It wasn't any of the ones that were of the 37.
I don't believe it's any of the plants that are on this list.
So is that a different part of the state, or they just aren't Or you don't know?
Well, they're already banned statewide, so we didn't feel like it was,
Yeah.
we didn't need to take any action here in
Oh,
Fayetteville.
well-
And the nurseries aren't allowed to sell them.
It's already
so-
illegal
So
to
that's,
sell,
okay, so
transfer.
that means the nurseries
Are they-
cannot sell them and so.
Are they like specifically agricultural nuisances and stuff? Is that?
One's, I believe, agricultural weed, two are aquatic, and the purple loosestrife is, I don't know how to describe purple loosestrife. I'm not overly familiar with them, in all honesty.
Could it be toxic? Could that be, you don't know?
No, I'm not sure. It's just an invasive, but, yeah, they're good loose stripes also, so.
Just curious.
So I have a question, you know, looking at the stakeholders that we did talk to, and I know we got into some of this at the city council meeting, you know, especially in the big box stores, not selling some of these very invasive species is not gonna hurt the big box stores, because most people don't want them in the first place, and the people that do don't know what they're buying, and if they did, they wouldn't get it.
Yeah.
But what about the local nurseries? How much resistance did we hear from them about selling that Bradford pear or the bush honeysuckle or the, you know, the Chinese privet? Are they very adamantly wanting to keep those as their options?
They, generally, the feedback we got was yes, they wanted to keep them as options because there was, you know,
Demand.
for the most part, they tried to talk customers out of buying a Bradford pear or other, you know, generally considered invasive plants. But in the rare circumstance where they were unable to persuade a customer to go with a dogwood or go with a redbud or go with some other similar type of tree, they just had to have that Bradford pear. They wanted to have a dusty old ratty looking Bradford pear off in the corner to satisfy that customer's need. And so that they wouldn't lose the sale and potentially lose that person as a future customer. So they wanted to keep that, and that's why they were generally against any sort of legislation that banned the sale of any of these.
Okay,
Any
so
hard
here's kind of my thought process, because I know there's been a lot of pushback against legislation that prevents the sale. Well, we can still incentivize people to not buy something by taxing the things, maybe into a fund to prevent invasive species or to mitigate invasive species if they are planted. Is that something that the committee considered, is, you know, having a tax on invasive species that are purchased and planted in the city?
It was I recall that we did some early policy analysis, and creation of a tax or a fund was a sort of a high-level policy analysis solution that an academic study we had found presented as a solution. We didn't find that I recall any communities that had enacted successfully such a fund or a tax, and so we did not, without having a successful model to look at, we didn't actively pursue that. I think what we might hear in response to such a proposal from the local retailers would be the similar feedback that we received about not being able to sell those plants would be if there's a tax on that plant here in Fayetteville, then the customer could just go to Springdale and buy that plant tax-free, and and still come back to Fayetteville and plant it and get around get around that tax, and thereby costing the Fayetteville retailer the sale.
Because, I mean, Westwood has
You know,
locations outside the area.
If, you know, a Bradford pear, what are those for a good size one? Under $100? I mean,
They were a little more. I remember that
I've
Westwood,
seen them
Westwood
I've seen them
said,
for like
I've seen them
80
for
bucks.
$99. I've seen them for
Yeah.
$59.
Westwood said they've had two sitting for the whole season. They've just been, like I said, just sitting in the corner.
I was gonna say, I mean, I don't think a surcharge, I guess, would be a better way to put it, not a tax, but for purchasing that plant of $5-10 that goes into a fund would actually hurt anything. Probably wouldn't stop the sale. I mean, I certainly wouldn't drive a Bentonville or Rogers or Springdale, but of course I wouldn't buy one in the first place.
But Bradford pear was probably one of the least, I'd say, talked about as like threatening at the current stage. But they admitted Chinese privets asked for. People come in from other areas like, oh, I want privet right now.
I don't even know.
Well,
So-
I spent, like I said, I spent Sunday with a chainsaw cutting out privet after I learned that it was invasive, and but I guess I don't see the top four. I'm looking at the top four as being the most invasive I don't know how big of a pushback we would get back from actually banning those four being planted in the city of Fayetteville. Planted, sold, any of it.
How do you even,
I mean, retailers wouldn't be able to sell them, people would be able, that'd be a code violation if they planted them. I'd be supportive of that.
how would you even enforce it?
Well, if someone gets, you know, someone has their neighbors,
Tell all the
you know,
neighbors.
Chinese privet starting to grow into their yard and it's been
So much of the
planted, then, you know.
enforcement is gonna have to happen after we are able to even eradicate or remove so
Yeah.
much there that we have, and that's one of the harder parts of the
It's
goals.
more taking responsibility,
Mhm.
is the way you would try to do it. It's like, why, yeah.
But if they're not available at the stores, I mean, you just think about your Saturday if you're gonna go planning, or if you, I know a lot of this is large scale construction when they're doing large projects, but if you think about going out on your Saturday and where you're gonna go buy plants and stuff, if you're the person that's going to Lowe's or Walmart or wherever, if they can't sell those items to you, then you're probably not gonna go home with them.
Right, you just buy something else.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless you're at a Springdale nursery or.
Maybe, yeah.
Right.
And that's probably the biggest challenge to that, is that you don't have to go far to circumvent that.
Mhm.
And from a taxation standpoint, I wonder how many people would even notice that they were paying extra. They just, if we're using it as a deterrent.
I think that'd be a challenge, because that's like setting up a bottle bill or setting up a, you know, fee. You'd have to, somebody's gonna have to administer it and keep that money,
Well, that money,
manage the
yeah,
money.
yeah.
That sounds like a challenge for a few plants.
Taxes are usually pretty generally easy to administer. It's just I was just with that thinking of a way to help Fayetteville offset some of the costs that we're going to incur by helping to remove some of these in some areas
Yeah.
in the future, hopefully.
I think the biggest part of what we talked with, especially with Westwood, is the education at the point of sale and preventing, I mean, and they admitted that they try to sway people to other things, but, you know, a possible thing in the future is any kind of media that would actually go on the sale of those. So it's like, you know, a black dot that goes on I'm not saying that would be the case, but, you know, something on that sticker that says, oh, this is a non-native. So people have that stigma if they're
More
trying to
notice.
buy it.
Yeah.
So there's various ways of prevention without
Yeah, that I
that
like.
antagonistic,
Yeah.
you know, deterrent of a tax or a ban that so many people are always, you know, you say the word ban and people just get their amendment rights up going,
And
Right.
the
Can't tell
the
me
paper
what
got
to do.
really excited
Yeah,
about it,
the
but
paper
their
got
article
really
made
excited.
really not a lot of
Right.
sense.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Peter, I interrupted.
No,
I
it's
got
okay.
off on a tangent.
Sorry.
Tangent.
So 18 plants, and what is currently being recommended by the stakeholder group are ordinance amendments to Chapter 177 in the Unified Development Code as part of City Code. That's the chapter that regulates landscape regulations associated with new development. The proposal is to add the list of 18 plants and then to prohibit the planting of those plants on any project that requires landscape plan review. And then associated with that would be species-based educational effort. This is an example right here with the invasive plant on the left, Creeping Euonymus, scientific name there, Aubrey, so there's no confusion on what we're talking about. And then a recommended replacement plant to the right.
Oh, good, so Carolina jasmine's okay?
Yes, yeah.
Because I love Carolina
Right.
jasmine, okay.
And
There's
Del
other
Rey said the
alternatives.
same thing at City
And that's a very impressive media in person. I mean, Lee did a great
Yeah,
job
I'll show you a
putting that
blow up
together.
of a different
It's
page here in just a second. So the impact of what this ordinance proposal would be is it would not allow these invasive plants to be, these 18 invasive plants to be installed in any new developments in Fayetteville by prohibiting their planting with any project that requires landscape plan review. That would include large-scale development plans, any subdivision plan, any small site improvement plan, or anything else that requires a building or grading permit except for single-family home construction. So everything essentially but single-family home construction will no longer be allowed to plant these plants as part of
So
part of their
apartments
landscape
and all
agreements.
that
Mhm,
are,
yep,
okay, good.
exactly. What they would not do, what the proposal would not do.
Sorry, I didn't mean to, I was just gonna ask, so in like a subdivision plan or site improvement plan, do they actually specify what plants they're gonna plant? And does that have to be
It,
approved? now?
it,
It
It depends on how the development is done. Sometimes they just subdivide and the landscaping is done on the individual lot level for individual homes. So those would actually be exempt in that circumstance. But if it were done as a large plan, all the homes were built at the same time, then the landscape requirements would apply.
So it would still be possible to build a neighborhood without having to fall into this, depending on how it was worked.
Yeah, depending on how it actually
But
developed.
there is a manual of, a list of plants to pick from right now, like
Right.
approved things for small,
Right.
large, big, and
Right.
this would change that a little.
Yes, so there's a landscape manual that is the kind of the how-to of chapter 177. And we're gonna do a revamp of that landscape manual to go along with this, to basically make it, easier for folks to plant, and use the right thing rather than the wrong thing. So what would the ordinance amendments not do? They would not limit the purchase or sale or possession of any of those 18 plants in Fayetteville, and it would not restrict homeowners from planting the plants, and it would not require anyone to remove the established plants. What also would go along with it is education on the negative impacts of the 18 plants, helping citizens know how to identify them, how to remove them properly, and then non-invasive alternatives. And here's a blow-up again of the species-based educational component. Again, the Chinese privet on the left, the invasive plant, and then a recommended non-invasive replacement plant, Black Hog viburnum, and then with several other alternative, non-invasive alternatives below. But the plan, and actually we have developed 18 of these educational sheets, one for each of the plants.
I think that's really cool.
That is
Are
awesome.
those online already, Peter?
They're not, no. Since it hasn't been,
Oh.
nothing's been approved yet,
Awesome, yeah.
nothing online.
Wonderful.
Can I ask one other quick thing on invasives? Was part of one of the reasons they're considered invasive, or because birds spread the seeds and those
Mhm.
kind of things? Is that
Well,
also one of
that,
the-
I don't know that that's necessarily the reason it's considered invasive, but that does happen to be the way a lot of the identified invasives tend to spread.
So like somebody's got a single Bradford pear in their yard and it's pretty, and they think, oh, well, that's not invading anywhere, but the fact is the birds might be spreading it, and that might be creating hundreds
Mhm.
in some field somewhere.
Yeah.
Same way with, like, you might have the bad kind of honeysuckle, and you think, oh, well, it's contained, it's not going anywhere, but is it the same thing where the seeds, it could still be spreading, you
Yeah.
just don't realize it?
Right.
Okay.
Well, that's the case on the honeysuckle vines, the Japanese honeysuckle flowers all along the stem, every pair of leaves, whatever. And on the native honeysuckle, both species, the yellow and the reddish orange one, they only bloom at the end of the stem. So they make like one seed for every 100. It's on a comparable length
Okay.
so it's, other things do the same. I mean, that's,
Not completely.
Okay.
And my question is there any way, any kind of incentive for people who have some of these invasive species in their yard to, if there was some kind of incentive or reward or something along those lines? I mean, that's gonna cost money, but still thinking in terms of somebody goes in and gets rid of their Bradford pears and puts up something else. It just seems like it would be nice to be able to recognize people in a positive way if they did things like that.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the programs that the Urban Forestry Advisory Board runs is a sustainable landscape competition. Every
Okay.
May, they award one residential property owner and one commercial property owner inside the city of Fayetteville the sustainable
Right.
landscape competition winner. And some of the previous winners have been folks who have done invasive removal and reestablishment of native plants.
And what kind of reward do they get for that? Recognition?
They get
Bragging
recognition,
rights.
they get a sign and actually a really nice plaque to display
Okay.
in their yard as well.
So that just seems like some way to recognize and also for people to learn from other people
Right.
what they've done.
Right,
So,
right, and they do tours as well
yeah.
of the sites.
Peter, I have one other question.
Mhm.
So I know that after this passes, a lot of things are probably gonna be set in motion, but what about those people who don't have, the tools to get rid of invasive species, or maybe they're elderly and don't have the actual physical capability of working to get rid of invasive species? Are we gonna offer any kind of assistance, or are we proposing, is staff proposing that?
No, there's not any, I think the city's efforts and staff's efforts primarily at this point have been trying to deal with the established invasive species on city-owned property.
Right.
There's been a lot of energy put at Wilson Park recently. The north half of the park has been predominantly invasive species free for several years now, but the south half still has some areas of honeysuckle and privet thicket and along the creek. And the greedy goats have been out there a couple of times. So I think, there's plenty of other city-owned property that still has establishment of very much
You know,
established invasive plants.
Private
That's-
property, to answer Alan's question, that might be the kind of thing where if somebody was all fired up, you could get a volunteer group, a church group, a
Yeah.
Boy Scouts, something like that, and do it on a Make a Difference Day or something like that, and go in there
Yeah.
and, make a project out of it.
And the weed,
Break waves and
what do they call the weed wrenches, the
Weed
weed,
range.
yeah, deal that, you guys have one with Omni, is that right?
Mhm.
And I believe the Fayetteville Public Library now has either one or two that are available for checkout. for
Well, I was
folks
just
to use.
wondering if, how we, as the city, administer this CBD, Community Building Development Grant, CBDG.
I know what you're
I
talking
can never say that right.
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
Community Development Block
Yeah, I can never say it in a row correctly. I'm just wondering if there's something that we could end up creating like that for special situations, maybe where an area's gotten too overly grown with
Mhm.
things.
Mhm.
Really to be sustainable in the area, you have to address those hot spots. So that
Yeah,
they're
it's certainly
not-
a good point, because invasive species do not recognize property lines.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
They will leapfrog and,
I've got a quick
Question.
story. I can't take any credit, but I'll tell the story. At the Vandergriff and McNair school property, they're putting in a mountain bike trail, and they turned that into an Eagle Scout project. So the Ozark Off-Road Cyclists and the assistant principal of Vandergriff, Jason, I don't know his last name, he's been real instrumental. And they had an Eagle Scout, and several moving parts, came together, and they, so the Eagle Scout, he got a whole gang of Boy Scouts, and, he helped, part of his project was to help organize it with a lot of guidance. And so